without warning. There's going to be just bang, the trumpet call of God is going to come from heaven. The church is going to be raptured. We're going to be in heaven. The period of tribulation that will follow the rapture, according to Daniel chapter 9, will be 7 years. After that 7-year period, according to Revelation chapter 19, the church and Christ and his angels are going to come from heaven and fight the battle of Armageddon. And by the way, did I ask if everybody has paper that you might need paper tonight? You might need to do some drawing or something like that. Then, so we come down from heaven, we fight the battle of Armageddon. The devil is imprisoned. And after the battle of Armageddon, there are 2 judgments that happen very, very quickly, may even happen simultaneously. One is the resurrection of the dead, the righteous believers. We read about the resurrection of the dead in Ezekiel 37, the book of Isaiah, the book of Hosea, different books of the Old Testament that talk about the resurrection of the dead, Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. And so you have the resurrection of the dead righteous, and they enter Christ's kingdom, and Christ's kingdom on earth is 1,000 years. Now, I was going to have a chart that I could put up on the screen tonight, but I didn't get it done in time, so sorry about that. And then at the same time, you have this another judgment, which is called the sheep and goat judgment. And so if you guys are kind of following that, the sheep and goat judgment, that's in Matthew chapter 25, and we will take a look at that. But if you want to get out a piece of paper and just think with me a second, what I want to do in these next few minutes is something that I've become more acutely aware of in the last 2 weeks as I've been studying this really intensively, and that is the massive confusion that existed in the world at the time of Christ. I should say the Jewish world, the massive confusion that existed in the Jewish world at the time of Christ, because they didn't really know what was going to happen with the Messiah. And if we just think about this for a second, obviously they knew the Messiah was going to come. And how did they know the Messiah was going to come? He was going to be born. Do you remember the scripture that talks about that? You have Isaiah. Let's see, it's Isaiah chapter 9. Let's see, is it 9? Yeah, Isaiah chapter 9. For unto us a child is born, unto us a child is given. So you have the birth of the Messiah. And also remember Micah 5:2. But you, Bethlehem, Ephrathah, out of you will come he who is to rule. So the first picture that everybody knew the Messiah was going to come at some point. But once the Messiah came on earth, what was going to happen to him? Well, the dominant picture in the Old Testament was that the Messiah would simply show up and conquer the earth. That was the dominant picture. And it's really important that we get this. So I'd like to take a second and run through some of these verses. Let's take a look at Isaiah. Let's see, what I'm going to do. Yeah, maybe I can just do this right off my screen. Let's see. Yeah, if you look at Isaiah chapter 9 and verses 6 and 7, by the way, you don't have to take notes on this if you don't want to. I'm reading right out of my commentary on Isaiah 61:2. So if you simply make a note that the commentary is Isaiah 61:2, in the coming days, I will spread this around a little bit so you'll be able to find it in more places. But so here you are, you're just a Jew, you're reading the book of Isaiah, and what do you read in Isaiah chapter 9? For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty Hero, Father of the Coming Age, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of his peace there will be no end. He will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from that time even forevermore. The zeal of Yahweh of armies will perform this. By the way, Yahweh of armies is what is standardly translated as the Lord of hosts, which, by the way, to me is just a complete joke in translation, because nobody in our generations knows that a host is an army. But both in Hebrew and Greek, the word is very clearly army. And God is called the Yahweh of armies because, of course, he fights evil. So there's the Messiah. What's he do? He's born, he's raised, he conquers the earth, and his kingdom lasts forever. There's your picture. Let's see another one. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 11, 1 to 9. I'm not going to read all 9 verses. Let's just read a few of them. Now here's Isaiah. Now Isaiah is 700, writing 700, maybe 730, 740 BC by the time he's writing Isaiah 11. And the Assyrian army is going to come and carry away Israel. And so at this point in time, Israel is just a stump of Jesse. Israel is not the glorious kingdom that it was when Solomon and David ruled. So, but all is not lost, because the verse says, verse 1, a shoot will come out of the stump of Jesse, a branch from his roots will bear fruit. So this is the Messiah, the Tzimach, the Messiah, the branch. And the Spirit of Yahweh will rest on him, a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel and power, a spirit of knowledge and the fear of Yahweh. He, this Messiah, will delight in the fear of Yahweh. He will not judge by what he sees with his ears, nor will he decide by what he with his eyes, nor will he decide by what he hears with his ears. But with righteousness he will judge the poor and decide with equity for the humble of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with a spirit from his lips he will kill the wicked. Righteousness will be the belt of his waist, and faithfulness the belt of his waist. And then the wolf will lie down and be peaceful. So the Messiah is born, and he immediately, after being raised up to a certain age, he conquers the earth. Very clear. Let's go to Isaiah 61. The Spirit of Yahweh is upon me. This, by the way, is what Christ quoted in Luke chapter 4 when he was launching his ministry. The Spirit of the Lord Yahweh is upon me. Yahweh has anointed me to preach the good news to the humble. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. Whoops. There we go. To proclaim liberty to the captives and release to those who are bound, to proclaim the year of Yahweh's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to appoint to those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning. And he goes on. So the king, the Messiah, is going to come, and he's going to talk about the acceptable year of the Lord and the day of vengeance of our God. And they're both going to be together. Micah chapter 5, verses 2 to 4. This is, again, the prophecy of the birth of Christ that the Pharisees and stuff told the Magi. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, being small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come forth one to me who is to be ruler in Israel, whose comings forth are from old, from ancient times, blah, 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 blah. Goes on, Zechariah 9 and 10. This one you'll remember. This is what the people were thinking about at the triumphal entry when Jesus Christ came over the Mount of Olives into Jerusalem, and they spread palm branches on the ground, and they said, Hosea, Baruch haba Hashem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. So this is what they were saying. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king comes to you. He is righteous and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be cut off, and he will speak peace to the nations, and his dominion will be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. And I could read more of these, and there are a lot more than I even have in the commentary, and I'm just in the process of building the commentary as I'm seeing these around the scripture and remembering where they are, because they're not under any one particular given heading.
What was that? 9 and 10.
10. Yeah, and again, these,
What book? What book? You said Micah?
yeah, that was, no, that was Zephaniah, if I remember,
Zephaniah. Okay,
Zechariah.
thank you.
Zechariah. And
Thank you.
again, all these notes, all the notes that I've just been reading from are all out of Isaiah chapter 61, verse 2 in the commentary. So, okay, so here you are, you're the apostles, and you've been raised in a synagogue, and you've been read these scriptures all your life. And you know, when the Messiah comes, he's going to conquer. Isaiah 61, you know, the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance. Zechariah 9, here comes the Lord. He's riding on a donkey, and he's bringing salvation, and he's going to break the bow in the war chariot, et cetera, et cetera. So, okay, we got that. The Messiah is going to come. He's going to conquer. Then we have another set of scriptures. And so let's go to, if you want to read along in my commentary, we can go to Daniel chapter 12, verse 2. I'm sorry, Daniel chapter 12, verse 1. And here the verse says, at that time, at what time? Okay, one of the things, see, what you and I do, we have the New Testament. So we know Christ came, Christ died, Christ was raised from the dead, Christ ascended, then there's the church age, then there's going to be the tribulation. They didn't know that. They knew that when Christ came, according to the prophecies, he was supposed to conquer. None of those verses we read in Isaiah or Zechariah or whatever, Micah, none of those talked about the Messiah dying. And so you fast forward to Matthew 16. Christ says to his apostles, who am I? Peter says, you're the Messiah, the Christ of God, Son of God. Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah. Flesh and blood hasn't revealed this to you. And it says, from that time forward, Christ began to tell them that he must suffer and die. What was Peter's reaction? He takes Christ aside. He says, no, Lord, this will never happen to you. Why didn't he believe that? Because it wasn't part of his training from the Old Testament. Let's go to, if we go to Matthew, let's see, is it Matthew? Where is that blasted thing? It's, yeah, John chapter 12. John chapter 12 in verse 30, Matthew chapter 12, let's see, 32. John chapter 12, verse 32. Jesus Christ is speaking to the multitudes, and he's talking about his death. Of course, he's talking about it in veiled terms, but they get what he's saying. So in verse 32, Christ says, and I, if I am lifted from the earth, will draw all people to myself. Now he said this, I like this. Now he said this clearly indicating what kind of death he was about to die. Well, it wasn't been clear to him, but it wasn't exactly that clear to the crowds. But there were people in the crowds that got it, because then they said, verse 34, so the multitude answered him. So this is the multitude. This is a conglomeration of people from different synagogues. They've had different rabbis, but the multitude answers, we've heard from the law that the Christ will remain forever. And so how can you say the Son of Man must be lifted up? Who is the Son of Man? Of course, Jesus was the Son of Man. So what's the multitude saying? The multitude's saying the exact same thing that Peter and the apostles are saying, which is, wait a minute, the Messiah is not going to die. Are you kidding? Didn't you just read all those scriptures? The Messiah is going to come and he's going to kick butt, and he's going to rule over the earth, and he's going to reign forever. Well, okay, we got that. Wait a minute, there are some scriptures about Christ dying. Two. There are two. Psalm 22:10 and Isaiah 53, and I forget what verse it is in Isaiah 53. There are two verses about Christ dying. And the vast, vast majority of it's kind of like Christianity today. There are plain scriptures about Christ coming back down to earth, fighting the battle of Armageddon, and setting his kingdom up on earth. plain scriptures. But the majority of Christianity simply has no knowledge of it and thinks that you're going to die and go to heaven. There were two scriptures in the Old Testament that talked about Christ dying. Psalm 22, which, by the way, doesn't even really have to be translated that way. But Psalm 22:10 can be translated that way. And then, like I say, there's one verse in Isaiah 53. Well, what happened as a result of this? Well, you had a small percentage of rabbis that said, this Messiah guy, he's going to die. Except the problem is it didn't fit in the scheme of things. So let's just take that and table it. Now, if you're taking notes, then what you've got is you've got this little tiny line where the Messiah comes and he conquers and he reigns forever. And then you've got this little bubble off to the side that says, the Messiah might have to die. So now we go to Daniel 12:1, and it says, at that time, Michael will stand up, the great leader who stands for the children of your people, and there will be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that same time, your people will be delivered. That is, everyone who's found written in the book. And so here's Daniel, and it portrays a time of trouble. Now, I'm going to let you do this because it would take us a long time. But if you make a note to go to my commentary, the REV commentary on Daniel chapter 12, verse 1, I'm simply going to read it and give you the verses. You guys on your own time can go back and check the verses. But let's talk about this time of trouble. Here's my summary. According to the prophets, the day of Yahweh, the great tribulation, will be a cruel day with people becoming scarce as gold. Isaiah 13:9-13. The earth will be laid waste with very few people left. Isaiah 24:1-23. The slain will lay like refuse on the ground, and the leaders will not escape. Jeremiah 25:29-38. It will be a time of Jacob's trouble. Jeremiah 37. A time of doom for the nations. Ezekiel 30:1-19. And a time of distress such as never been seen before on the earth. Daniel 12:1. Believers will have an especially difficult time because the Antichrist will make war against them and prevail against them. Daniel 7:21-25. The great tribulation will be a time of darkness and gloom. Joel 1:15 and 2:1-11. Woe to people who think they're righteous and long for the day of the Lord as if it would vindicate them, because it will not. Amos 5:18-20. People's evil deeds will return upon themselves. Obadiah 1:15-16. God, in anger and wrath, will take vengeance on the land and on the nations, destroy witchcraft and idols to the end that there will be no more idolatry. Micah 5:10-15. It will be a day of wrath, distress, and anguish, a day of trouble, ruin, gloom, and darkness. No one's wealth will be able to deliver them. God will make a terrible end to the people who dwell in the land. God will sweep them away, humans, animals, fish, and birds, everything from the face of the earth. Zephaniah chapter 1, verses 2-18. God will shake both the heavens and the earth. Haggai 2:6-7. And that day will burn like a furnace. Malachi 4:1. Now, as I ran through that list, one thing that I hope jumped out to you is that this time of great tribulation is not hidden. It's in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Micah, Zephaniah, Haggai, and Malachi. So it's in the majority. This teaching about the great time of trouble is in the majority of the prophets. What's intriguing is there's no connection in these scriptures between it and the Messiah. So now we have this, and this is what was coming together for me in these weeks. I'm like, wow, because see, I've had such a clear picture of the process, what's going to happen, because I've integrated the Old Testament, the Gospels, and the book of Revelation. But if you disintegrate them and say, okay, what did the apostles know? Well, they had all these scriptures said the Messiah was going to get born, and he was going to be raised up, and he was going to be a king, and he was going to kick butt, and he was going to kill the wicked and set up his kingdom. Then you got two scriptures that, well, yeah, there's these two scriptures that indicate he's going to die, but I don't see how they fit into the picture. And then you've got this terrible time of trouble that everybody talks about. Where is it? Where's this time of trouble? It never says, that while the Messiah is a child, this time of trouble is going to come, or there's no scripture that allows you to anchor this time of trouble into the life of the Messiah. Now, you and I know why. Now, with our vision from the New Testament, we know what happened is the Messiah came, he died, he was raised, he ascended, and he'll be in heaven for this time of trouble. But one of the things that became really clear to me, I mean, I'd known it before, but you can kind of know facts and they don't completely come together as clearly as they should, was there is no ascension in the Old Testament. Ain't there, doesn't happen. You cannot find me one single verse. I have looked and looked and looked. I have read the prophets over and over. There's not one single verse about the ascension in the Old Testament. Now, that's really interesting, because if there's no ascension, then what you have is you have the Messiah coming. He's supposed to kick butt in the world, become king, and set up his kingdom and rule forever. And there's this time of trouble that we don't know what to do with. When does that happen? And by the way, the Messiah is going to die, but there's only two scriptures that say that. And maybe I'm misunderstanding them. Peter sure didn't believe it. The crowd sure didn't believe it. Just for your knowledge, if you want to do some extra research, what the rabbis who did think that the Messiah was going to die, what they did with it, and you can Google this, so write this down and you can Google it. Instead of seeing what you and I see, that the Messiah would die and then be raised from the dead, and there would be two comings. There would be the first coming in which he would die, and the second coming in which he would conquer. What the rabbis did was they said, and again, this is a very, very small percentage of them, because most of the rabbis just said the verses about dying, we misunderstand them. Everybody knows the Messiah is going to live forever. But there was a small percentage that said, okay, the Messiah is going to die. So what they did is they postulated two Messiahs. And they called them Messiah ben Joseph, because the rabbis taught that the first Messiah, the Messiah who was going to die, came out of the tribe of Ephraim. And Ephraim was a child of Joseph. So they said, yeah, we see it. We see this Messiah coming is going to die. And we see this Messiah coming that's going to conquer. Well, since the Messiah that's going to conquer comes, he's born on earth and he grows up and then he conquers, he can't be the Messiah who's going to die. That doesn't make any sense. So they postulate two Messiahs. So Messiah ben Joseph, they said he's going to come out of the tribe of Ephraim and he's going to be a Messiah, and then he will be killed. Because remember, Messiah only meant anointed one. God is going to put his spirit upon him or anoint him in some way, and then he's going to die. Isaiah 53, Psalm 22. And then at some later date, there's going to be this other guy, and he's going to be Messiah ben David, Messiah, the son of David. And he's going to come and he's going to conquer. And so we have this time period. So we're still in, Christ is going to come. He's going to get born, he's going to come and go through time, and then he's going to set up his kingdom. We don't know what to do with the tribulation yet. If you're reading the Old Testament, you have no idea what to do with the tribulation. Then we do know that the Messiah is going to conquer the earth. So if we take a look at Isaiah 63, let's go to Isaiah chapter 63, and we can see the Messiah conquering the earth. But what's intriguing about this, let's see, I'll get there myself in a second here. And what's intriguing about the Messiah coming and conquering the earth is he doesn't come from heaven. You and I are used to, wait a minute, what happened to the Battle of Armageddon? What happened to Revelation 19? He's supposed to ride down on his white horse from heaven, and he's supposed to conquer the earth. And that will happen. But Revelation wasn't written yet. They didn't have any of that knowledge. Now what here, so here it is, verse 63, and interestingly enough, the ancient rabbis and the oldest sources we had or have do know that Isaiah 63 is about the Messiah. So in the verses we read about the Messiah coming and conquering in the day of vengeance of our God, the rabbis did tie that to this in Isaiah 63. So here comes Isaiah 63. Who is this who comes from Edom with dyed garments from Basra? And Basra is an important town in the country of Edom. Edom is southeast of Israel. Now, this is very interesting because he says, it goes on, who, this who, well, wait a minute, this who is glorious in his clothing. I need to change that translation. I didn't catch that. Marching in the greatness of his strength. And he speaks, it is I who speaks in righteousness, mighty to save. Why is your clothing red and your garments like those who tread the winepress? And you will probably remember that in the book of Revelation, the Battle of Armageddon is also called the winepress. So here, who treads in the wine vat. I've trampled the winepress alone, and of the peoples there was no man with me. Yes, I trampled them in my anger, and I trampled them in my wrath, and their lifeblood is sprinkled on my garments, and I have stained all my clothing. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and the year of my redeemed has come. I looked, and there was none to help. It's interesting that he keeps repeating there was none to help, because remember, we're going to be coming down with Christ to fight the Battle of Armageddon, but we're in the church. And the church was a sacred secret. It was a mystery. So as far as the book of Revelation, as far as the book of Isaiah is concerned, 700 years before Christ, Christ didn't have any people to help him. If this was written now in the book of Revelation, we would be able to help him. But nobody knew about us. We're in the church. We're a sacred secret. So here comes Christ, and he's going to fight the Battle of Armageddon, but but they didn't call it the Battle of Armageddon. It's just he's just simply conquering the nations. We know from the prophecies he was going to get born, he was going to kill the wicked, and then he was going to reign forevermore. Here he is killing the wicked. And where does he come from? He comes from Edom. And if you read like Deuteronomy 33, the book of Joshua, I'm trying to think what prophet it was. But anyway, when the Israelites came out of Sinai and conquered the promised land, and God was with them, and God's angel was leading them, they came through Edom. Actually, they skirted right around the edge of Edom. God did not let them go through and take any territory in Edom. So here in Sinai, with the Exodus, getting the promised land for the first time, here comes God and his angel leading the army of Israel through the general area of Edom and into the promised land, and he conquers. Now it's years later, and the nations have taken over the promised land, and so it's got to be reconquered. And here comes the Messiah, God's representative. He's going to reconquer the promised land. Where does he come? He comes the exact same way the Israelite army came out of the Sinai to conquer the promised land. So that's the picture here. And then we'll learn from Zechariah that he'll stop and his feet will land on the Mount of Olives. And when his feet touch the Mount of Olives splits. And then then he just kind of is stated to have conquered the land, and he will set up his kingdom. So, but it's a little disjoint because again, we've got, so if we've got this picture, then here's the Messiah, he's going to be born, he's going to conquer, somehow or other, he's going to figure out how to get out of Israel, he's going to end up down there in Edom, he's going to trample around in the nations down there, then he's going to come into the promised land and conquer the promised land. You and I know he's going to come down from heaven. If this prophecy fits with Revelation 19, when we come down from heaven, we're going to land somewhere in the area of Edom, and then we'll move into the promised land and fight the Battle of Armageddon. So there's this picture now. So Christ's kingdom is set up on earth. Now we have how is Christ going to populate his kingdom? Well, he's going to, by the way, is this confusing as all get out, or is this, am I going slow enough and going back over it that it's making some kind of sense? Is this, I hope this is, okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, what about Daniel, that Son of Man coming down from heaven?
Okay, yeah, okay, and that's a great one. Let's just go there. That's Daniel 7:25. So let's just go there. And what we see, I'm sorry, it's not 25:13. So what we have is the Antichrist is causing problems for people. In verse 8, the Antichrist is called the little horn, and then the time is going by and the little horn is reigning and causing all kinds of problems. We know him as the Antichrist. He causes all kinds of problems. In verse 9, thrones are set in place in the Ancient of Days. This is God takes his seat. So this is parallel to Revelation chapter 4, when God is sitting on his throne with the angels around him, and there's fire coming out from before him, and there's thousands upon thousands ministering to him. Again, a picture of Revelation 4 and 5. The court was seated. Verse 11, I kept looking because of the sound of the arrogant words that the horn, the Antichrist, was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain. Now, you and I know from Revelation 19 and 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 that it's Jesus who kills the Antichrist. But here, we don't know. He's killed. We're not really sure how. And then the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, yet their lives are prolonged. This is Revelation chapter 20, when the devil and his demons are thrown into the abyss and chained up. Verse 13, kind of a new vision. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like a son of man was coming with the clouds of heaven, and he came up to the Ancient of Days. Now, he's coming with the clouds of heaven now, and it's like, wait a minute, the Antichrist's already been slain. It isn't that he came down and fought the Battle of Armageddon. It's like the Antichrist has already been slain. So once again, because this is kind of a new thing, I saw in my night visions, and behold, we now can transpose that backward and say, okay, so the way it worked is the Messiah is going to come down in the clouds of heaven, but you couldn't prove that from the book of Daniel. So I hope that's you're seeing that a little bit, Nina. And the other thing is that, see, you and I, because Christ in Acts chapter 1 was taken up into the clouds, and then the angel said, he shall so come in like manner as you have seen him go. So we have this firm idea that when the Messiah comes, he's going to come down in the clouds, and he will. But in the Old Testament, what did it mean to come in a cloud? Well, it meant to come in the presence of God. And if you remember when Moses set up the tabernacle, it said the cloud filled the tabernacle and the priests couldn't minister. Same thing happened when Solomon built the temple. The cloud filled the temple and the priests couldn't minister. Same thing on Mount Sinai. The cloud was on the mountain and the voice came out of the cloud. Same thing when Ezekiel chapter 1, when God's chariot throne is coming toward Ezekiel across the plain. It's Ezekiel, I believe it's 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's right there in the early verses of Ezekiel. There's a cloud surrounding. Here comes God's chariot throne. It's coming from the east to Ezekiel, and it's surrounded by a cloud. And the cloud is not coming down. The cloud in that case is coming sideways. So if you were reading this at the time of the Old Testament, see, you and I can read it, understanding Revelation 19, understanding Acts chapter 1, and say, okay, we know the cloud is coming down from heaven. But the only reason we know that is because of Acts 1 and because of Revelation 19. In the Old Testament, they'd read that he was coming with the clouds of heaven, and they just say that he's coming in the presence of God. He's coming with God's power and God's glory. And that's what's going on here. So you and I can understand this in a way, and that's one of the reasons. Remember, 2 Corinthians chapter 3 says that even today, if Moses is read without an understanding of Christ, there's a veil on their face. And that's exactly what happens. If you try to read this without understanding the New Testament, you don't understand it. All you know is that when Christ comes, he's going to be surrounded by the glory and power of God. But you don't know he's coming down from heaven. Now with Acts chapter 1, Revelation chapter 19, we know he's coming down from heaven. Does that help? I mean, that should help kind of put this into perspective. So anyway, now when Christ sets up his kingdom, we know, let's go to Ezekiel 37. When Christ sets up his kingdom, it's going to be populated by two sets of people. And I told you that, you're sitting here probably going, okay, John, you've now taught for, holy cripes, about 40 minutes, and we haven't gotten to the rapture yet. And you're probably saying to me, John, I thought this was going to be about the rapture. We haven't talked about the rapture yet. But we've got to understand the rapture in terms of New Testament stuff. And so Old Testament stuff. And so that's what we're doing now. If you guys, this is what's really come clear to me in the last few weeks, as I've really been pounding my brain on this pretty much nonstop. So here's Ezekiel 37. Christ is going to rule over the people of the earth, but also you're going to have a resurrection of those people who are righteous. And so in Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 12, verse 11, then he, Yahweh, said to me, Ezekiel, son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. Behold, they say, our bones are dried up and our hope is lost. We are cut off completely. And that's the way Israel felt, because Ezekiel was written during the time of the Babylonian captivity. Ezekiel was a captive close to Nippur in Babylon, 600 miles away from Israel. And and Israel was just gone. The 10 northern tribes had been carried away by Assyria. Judah had been carried away by Babylon. There basically wasn't even anybody left in the land of Judah, except the poorest of the land. And so they say, our hope is gone. We're cut off. Verse 12, therefore prophesy and tell them, this is what Lord Yahweh says. Behold, I will open your graves and cause you to come up out of your graves, O my people, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. And you will know that I am Yahweh when I have opened your graves and caused you to come up out of your graves, O my people, and I will put my spirit in you and you will live, and I will place you in your own land. So that the resurrection of the just, people are going to come up out of the graves and go into the land of Israel. There's absolutely no mention of the air. And it would take me another 90 minutes, and I'm not going to do it, but you can now start and you can go back as far as you want to go. You can go to Adam and Eve being put on the earth. You can go to the promise to Abraham that he would get the land, the promise of God to Isaac that he would get the land, the promise of God to Jacob that he would get the land, the command to Moses to conquer the promised land, the command to Solomon to build a temple for God on the promised land, the command to Moses that I will choose a place on the land where my temple will go and where I will dwell. And you can take that all the way through Ezekiel, where Ezekiel is going to portrays the temple in the millennial kingdom and the reestablishment of the land of Israel. You can go to prophecies like in Hosea, where the lost tribes of Israel and Judah are going to get back together and they're going to live on the land. So all of the prophecies are about the land. There's no prophecy anywhere about being in heaven. And that becomes really important because the rapture is all about heaven. And you don't, it's so simple to read 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 and we're going to be in the air. But if you start at Genesis with Adam and Eve in the garden and you read from Genesis through, in fact, you can actually read from Genesis all the way through the Gospel of John, John chapter 21, and everything was about being on the land. Even in the Sermon on the Mount, the meek will inherit the earth. In the Sermon on the Plain, the meek will inherit the earth. There was nothing about the air whatsoever. And there was another thing that was important. Okay, so Christ is going to conquer, and Christ is going to set up his kingdom, and his kingdom's going to be forever, and the dead are going to be raised. And if the dead are going to be raised, they're going to have everlasting bodies. Okay, but when Christ conquers, what happens to all the living people? I mean, we read Daniel 12:1 with all those verses in Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, about this tribulation that, by the way, once again, we still haven't figured out in the Old Testament where we're going to put it. It's just this time of tribulation that's going to happen. But there's no verse that connects it with the life of the Messiah. Again, we know why, because he's ascended to heaven. But they had no idea why the Messiah and the tribulation aren't together somehow. Where do we put this tribulation in the life of the Messiah? Couldn't do it. They couldn't figure it out. We got the Messiah who's going to live and conquer the earth, and we got this tribulation period, and we don't get it. And they didn't. So now the Messiah has conquered the earth, and you got all these people in the Messiah's kingdom. And what's going to happen to them? Well, they're going to get old and they're going to die. They're going to marry and they're going to have kids. Let's go to Isaiah chapter 63 again. Let's see. Is that where I want to be? I don't think it is. I think I want to be in Isaiah 65. Sorry about that. Yeah. So now the Messiah is going to conquer the earth. And because the Messiah is going to conquer the earth, the prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 is that the lion will eat straw like the ox, the leopard will play with the young goat, the child will play by the cobra's hole, and there's going to be no danger anywhere. So animal nature is going to change. The animals are going to all play nice again. And so that's why he says in verse 17, behold, I create a new heavens and a new earth. Why? Well, it's not the third heaven and earth that we're aware of from Revelation chapter 21, but it's really different because the millennial kingdom is so different from what you and I are experiencing now. So he says, be glad and rejoice forever in what I create. I create Jerusalem to be a joy, her people to be a delight. Verse 19, did I give you the verse? This is Isaiah 65:19. I will rejoice in Jerusalem and joy in my people, and no more will be heard in it the voice of weeping or the voice of crying. No longer will there be in it an infant who lives but a few days, or an old man who does not live out his days. For the young man will die at 100 years old, and anyone who falls short of 100 years will be thought of as accursed. They will build houses and live in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They will not build houses, but another live in them. They will not plant and another eat. But as the days of a tree will be the days of my people, meaning they're going to live really long time. My chosen ones will long enjoy the work of their hands. Verse 23, they will not labor in vain, nor bear children who will experience calamity. For they are the seed of the blessed of Yahweh. So Christ comes out of Edom, Isaiah 63, and he conquers the earth and tramples down the nation. And there's all these people left. And what'll happen to the people? Well, they just continue to be people. they get old, they die. And the interesting thing is that there's not a word in the Old Testament about what happens to these people, except they get old and die. There's nothing about a second resurrection. You know, are they going to get up from the dead if they die, or are they just unlucky because they didn't die before the Messiah came the first time? I mean, and people would just have to shrug their shoulders and say, we don't know, because the Old Testament doesn't tell you a thing about what happens to these people, except they're just regular people. They marry, they get old, they die, they have kids.
Hey, John?
Yeah.
Can you clarify something?
Sure.
At the beginning of the millennial kingdom, we have the sheep and goat judgment.
Yeah.
And the sheep are brought into the millennial kingdom.
Yeah.
And we have the resurrection of the just.
Yeah.
And the just are brought into the kingdom.
Yeah.
The just are resurrected with new bodies.
Yes.
Okay. So the people that you're talking about who will be in the kingdom and who will live out their days, however long that may be, and they will die, are only the sheep that come out of the tribulation, or is it both?
No, it's the sheep who come out of the tribulation.
And
Yeah.
the just that were resurrected
They live forever.
now have eternal life.
Right. They have everlasting bodies. So you're a little bit ahead of me. That's where I was going to go next.
Sorry.
That's okay. So what the impression I wanted to leave you guys with, and you heard Dennis talk about the sheep and goat judgment, is here are the people reading the Old Testament. They know that Christ's kingdom is populated by the people raised from the dead, like Ezekiel 37 said. And they also know it's populated by regular people who are going to get married, bear children, get old, and die. And what in the world happens to those regular children, those regular people in the Bible, the Old Testament, the Old Testament is completely silent. Nobody knows, just a mystery. Now we go forward to the sheep and goat judgment of Matthew chapter 25. So let's go to Matthew chapter 5, verse 31. 25. Matthew chapter 25, verse 31. Now Matthew 24, you're all very familiar with. Matthew 24, the disciples come to Christ as he's leaving the temple, and they say, what are the signs of your coming? And he talks about the Great Tribulation. And Matthew chapter 24 is for almost exclusively and totally about the Great Tribulation. And then he tells them to be prepared and tells them, and frankly, there never should have been a Matthew chapter 25, because the disciples said, tell us what will be the signs of your coming. And his answer is chapter 24 and chapter 25. And by making that chapter 25 break, people don't see that Christ's answer to the question is this huge 2-chapter question. So in chapter 24, he tells them about how horrible things are going to be. Then he opens up with chapter 5, telling the parable of the 10 virgins. 5 were prepared, 5 weren't, telling them to be prepared. Then he tells them the parable of the talents, starting in 25:14, meaning that you're going to be judged based on how you've used your gifts that God has given you. And then in verse 31, Christ is now going to say, he's going to clarify a huge question that anyone reading the Old Testament would have. What happens to the regular people? And so Christ says in Matthew 24, he had finished up by saying the Son of Man's going to come with the signs of the heavens, and he's going to land on the earth. Verse 31 now, and you could literally go from the end of Matthew chapter 24 to chapter 25:31 and get rid of the couple parables. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, because they still didn't know about the church, now we know the angels, the Son of Man, and us are going to come down with Christ. But he didn't know that at the time. We're part of the sacred secret. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. The king will say to the ones on his right, come, you who've been blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom that's been prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and then in verse 36, naked. Verse 37, the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or fed you or thirsty, gave you drink? When did we see you a stranger and took you in or naked and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison and came to you? And the king answering will say to them, truly, I say to you, inasmuch as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, even the least, you did it to me. So Christ in here, and you can, and basically then he says in verse 41, then he will also say to the ones on his left, that's the goats, depart from me, you cursed, into the fire of the coming age, which has been prepared for the devil and his angels. And then the angels come and escort these guys. So now we have a piece of the puzzle that you can read the entire Old Testament and not get. Okay, so Christ conquers the earth, Isaiah 63, tramps all the nations in his blood, becomes the righteous king, kills the wicked. You got all these people left. And what's he going to do with them? And Christ says, I'll tell you what we're going to do with them. We're going to gather them from the four corners of the world, because Christ's reign is going to be over the entire world. So his angels are going to go out and gather every single living person that's on the face of the earth and bring them before the throne of Jesus Christ. And then let me put this in chronological order. So what we know is Christ comes down from heaven, fights the battle of Armageddon. And after fighting the battle of Armageddon, killing the army of the Antichrist, and killing the beast and the Antichrist are thrown into the Gehenna alive. Then Christ sets up his throne, and this happens. He says to his angels, okay, go out, and if there's a living soul on this planet, you bring him here, because I'm going to set up my kingdom. It's going to reign over the entire world, and the only ones that I want in it are people that deserve to be in it. So every single living soul is brought before him. He divides them into two categories, sheep and goats. The goats are escorted by the angels directly into Gehenna, and the sheep get to come into his kingdom. And then they are going to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah. They're just regular people. They're just natural people like you and me. They're going to marry. They're going to have children. They're going to get old, and they're going to die. And even though their age, they're going to live. If you die at 100, you'll be considered accursed. So they'll live a long time, but they're going to age and die. They're going to have children who are going to have children who are going to have children. Those children, some of them are going to believe. Some of them aren't going to believe. That's why we know there's a millennial kingdom in a second. At the end of the millennial kingdom, at the end of the 1,000 years, there's another judgment. And all those natural people that have never been judged, they're all going to be judged. And so, so what we need to understand then is, here come these natural people into Christ's kingdom, and they're alive, and they aren't changed. They just grow old and they die. Now, okay, right at this point, you've got enough background to have what happens to us really make an impact on you, because here's what we've got from the Old Testament prophecies. The Messiah is going to come. The Messiah is going to be born. He's going to grow up. He's going to mature. There's some scriptures about the fact he's going to die, but we don't know how they fit, because how could he die and conquer the world? That doesn't make any dang sense. But anyway, and there's other things about this great giant tribulation. Maybe that's when Christ conquers the world. Things are going to be really horrible, but could it really take him 7 years to do that? That doesn't seem to make sense. Okay, so Christ is going to come, he's going to grow up, then he's going to conquer the world and kill the wicked, and the righteous people who are alive, they're just going to live in his kingdom, and they'll get old and they'll die, and we don't know what's going to happen to them. Christ says, I'll tell you what's going to happen to them. I'm going to judge them. The wicked are going to go immediately into Gehenna. The righteous are going to be allowed into my kingdom, my 1,000-year millennial kingdom, which the Old Testament says nothing about. And in that kingdom, they will grow old and die, and they will be judged at the second resurrection. Now, with that background, go to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And in 1 Corinthians 15, And I'll get there myself here in a second. Sorry about the wait. Verse 51. And here's the Apostle Paul, and remember, he is talking about death and resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15. And he says, look, I tell you a sacred secret. We will not all sleep. And you guys all know that means to die. We won't all die, but we will all be changed. You can hear the Corinthian church. You know, remember that Paul went to the synagogue. The Corinthian church, the core of the Corinthian church were all Jews. Remember, Paul went into the synagogue and there was Crispus and there was a big row and the Jews dragged him before Gallio, the proconsul. So the core of the Corinthian church is all Jews. What have they heard all their life? And when they got interested in Christ and they're reading the Old Testament and they're trying to learn about that, they're like, yeah, and the people that get into the kingdom, they're living and they get old and they die. And here comes Paul and he says, you know what, guys? Changing the program. I'm going to tell you a sacred secret. I'm going to tell you something that's part of the administration of grace. I'm going to tell you something that no one knew, not even according to 1 Corinthians 2:14. The devil didn't know this stuff, because if he had, he wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. And he says, look, I tell you a sacred secret. We will not all sleep, but we will all be changed. And this is a brand new revelation. No one knew. I mean, in fact, actually, in the Old Testament, they're still not changed, But for the church, for you and I, if you died, if you're in the book of Revelation and you're alive at Armageddon, you will not be changed. You'll go through the sheep and goat judgment just exactly like Matthew chapter 25 says. But if you are a Christian, if you are born again in the age of grace and you are alive at the rapture, you will be changed. And that's a brand new revelation and a brand new concept. If you're if you're a Christian and you're alive at the rapture, you're changed. If you miss the rapture and you get saved during the book of Revelation, toughies. You go into the kingdom as a natural person, you get old and you die. The revelation that will be changed is brand new, is a sacred secret. It was part of the great mystery. And he says, we will be changed, verse 52, in a moment, the Greek atomos, meaning the smallest indivisible particle of time, bang, as fast can be, literally, in the blink of an eye at the last trump, for the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised incorruptible, and we, because the Apostle Paul thought the rapture would happen in his lifetime, will be changed. And Paul was a trained rabbi. He knew that this is brand new stuff. Nobody ever knew this before. So now let's go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. And then what's intriguing is when the rapture occurs, now we've got Christ is in heaven, we're in heaven, and you've had these thorny scriptures from the Old Testament about it's going to be a cruel day. Very few people are left. Mankind will be scarce as gold. Mankind will be like refuse on the ground. You've got all these scriptures that never fit anywhere in the Old Testament program, because the Messiah was going to come and he was going to grow up and he was going to conquer the earth. And it's like, where does this stuff even fit? And besides that, it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. And now all of a sudden we've got, I know where that fits. That fits after the rapture. And we'll see a little more about this. So 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verse 13 says, now we don't want you to be ignorant, brothers and sisters, concerning those who are asleep, in order that you will not grieve like the rest of mankind who have no hope. For since we believe that Jesus died and was raised, in other words, we got saved, in the same way, through Jesus, God will bring from the grave those who have fallen asleep in him. For this we say to you by the word of the Lord, that we who are alive, who are left until the coming of the Lord will certainly not precede those who have fallen asleep. According to the Old Testament and according to the Gospels, if you're alive when the Lord comes, what happens? You go into the kingdom and you get old and you die. Now this is a new program, part of the sacred secret. He says, the Lord will descend from heaven with a loud command, with the voice of the ruling angel, with the sound of the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be suddenly caught up together with them in the clouds for a meeting with the Lord in the air. And in this manner, we will always be with the Lord. And then there's this very interesting statement. It says, so then, comfort one another with these words. Well, I don't know if you've ever thought about it before, but if you were reading the Old Testament and you read all those prophecies about this horrible time coming on the earth, there is not one single prophecy of comfort in all of that. In fact, what's it say in Amos? Woe unto you who desire the day of the Lord, because it'll be a day of darkness and not light. Now, look at. Let's go back to Matthew chapter 24. And you can keep a ribbon here if you want, but we'll go to Matthew 24. And let's see what Christ has to say about the tribulation. He's on the Mount of Olives. The disciples say, what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? Verse 3, Christ says, see to it that no one misleads you. And verse 7, there's going to be war and famines and earthquakes. Verse 9, okay, we're talking about believers here. Jewish believers, but believers, and they will hand you over to be tortured and will even kill you. And you will be hated by all the nations because of my name. And many will fall away, meaning they'll leave the Jewish faith. They'll leave their belief in God and will hand over one another and will hate one another. And there's many false prophets that will arrive. Many will be misled of the Jewish believers, the ones that were following, they're going to be misled. The love of many will grow cold. Anybody see any comfort in that? You can read about the tribulation in the Old Testament. You can read about the tribulation in the four Gospels. You can read about the tribulation in the book of Revelation. There's not a word of comfort.
I have a question at this point.
Okay.
Okay, then Old Testament believers, they knew their everlasting life, right?
Yeah, they knew if you, you had to stay faithful to death to have everlasting life.
Yeah, so they know they're going to be raised some point.
Yeah, if they stayed faithful to death, they knew, yes, they would be raised.
So, but they didn't know what time period. Is that?
Yeah, basically what they knew is if they knew if they died before the Messiah came, they'd be in the category of Ezekiel 37 and they would get up. They knew that. That prophecy was pretty clear, and Isaiah 26 or maybe it's 24 and Hosea 13. And so there's and Daniel 12, frankly, Daniel talks verse 2, Daniel 12:2. So there's a number of verses that talk about the resurrection. Now, according to Habakkuk, you had to be faithful, in Ezekiel and other places, you had to be faithful. But if you, like Abraham and David and Ruth and Esther and people that were faithful to death, yeah, they're saved and they were going to get up in that resurrection. Yeah. If you were still alive, you just kind of had to hang in there. And that's the difference between the Old Testament stuff and the permanence of salvation that we have due to the new birth. Okay. For us, salvation is in birth and it happens in a moment of time. For them, salvation was a result of maintaining their faith over time. Does that help, Mina?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So my point is you're reading the four Gospels and there's, what does it say? I'll hand you over to be tortured and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations. And you guys might remember the verse in Revelation. I'll bet I can find it. I'll bet I can find it real quick if you just give me a second. It says, blessed are the dead. Let's see if I can find that. Yes, Revelation 14:13. We can just go there. It's nice to have all this stuff just right at kind of your fingertips when you're doing this study stuff. But the New Testament, let's go to the book of Revelation. Let's go to Revelation chapter 14. And it's talking about the time of the Antichrist and that kind of thing. And so let's see, in verse 9, it says to these believers, if you you worship the beast and receive the mark, then you're going to drink of the wrath of the fury of God, and you'll be in the torment of Gehenna. And so verse 12 in that context says, this demands the endurance of the holy ones. Thank God for the new birth. We don't have to go through this. Verse 13, and I heard the voice from heaven saying, right, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yeah, if in the tribulation period you die and you're in the Lord when you die, then you're blessed. But I don't really think that's a word of comfort. You want to stay faithful, but it's certainly not a word of comfort. So what I want you to see, if we go back to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, is here you've read about all this tribulation through all the prophets in the Old Testament. You read about the tribulation in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21. You've read about the tribulation in the book of Revelation itself, and there's nothing that speaks about being comforted. It's just stay faithful to death, and I'll give you the crown of life. He that endures to the end will be saved. Blessed are you if you die in the Lord. And here's the Apostle Paul. And he's writing about the rapture in Thessalonians. And he says, camping back on 1 Corinthians 15, you guys, the dead's going to get up, but the living, they're going to be changed and go to heaven to be with the Lord too. And comfort one another with these words. And it's the only comfort associated with the time of the end. And it's about the rapture. And then there are other things that support the fact that we're raptured into heaven. Look at Ephesians chapter 2, verse 6, very, very famous verse. You guys know this. You guys are well aware of this verse, and it says that we've been raised up with him, with Christ, and he seated us with him in the heavenly places in Christ Jesus, because we are going to heaven in the rapture. So we are spoken of as if we are already seated in heavenlies. Is there any verse like this in the Old Testament? No. Gospels? No. Book of Revelation? No. This is a verse that stands on its own. Look at Philippians. Philippians chapter 3, verse 20 says, for our citizenship is in heaven, from which we also wait for a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ. Oh, okay, we are citizens of heaven. We're the Old Testament believers, citizens of heaven? No. Is there any mention of being a citizen of heaven in the Gospels? No. Is there any mention of being a citizen of heaven in the book of Revelation? No, there's not. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 1 and in verse 10. What are we supposed to do? Verse 10 of 1 Thessalonians 1, and to wait for his Son from heaven, whom God raised out from the dead, that is Jesus, our deliverer from the wrath to come. Oh, we've been delivered from the wrath to come. Well, yeah, how does that happen? We get raptured before the wrath. And when is the wrath? Well, you start way back in the Old Testament, and there's all those prophetic verses that we looked at about the wrath of God. Then you read Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 about the wrath of God on the earth. And you can even go forward to the book of Revelation if you want to take a quick look at the book of Revelation. Chapter 6, Revelation chapter 6 is the start of the tribulation, of the great tribulation period. Revelation chapter 6 is the start of the seal judgments. And if you remember in the book of Revelation, there are 7 seals, then 7 trumpets, then 7 thunders, then 7 bowls, and then the battle of Armageddon occurs. So you have all this wrath and stuff. And so early on in the book of Revelation, these are the people. Verse 15, we'll just read it. The kings of the earth and the princes, the military commanders and the rich and the strong, and every slave and free person hid themselves in the caves and in the rocks of the mountains. And they say to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come. And who was able to stand? It's very clear from the Old Testament, from the Gospels, from the book of Revelation, that this tribulation period is a period known as the wrath. And what does 1 Thessalonians tell us? That we're not going to go through the wrath. So that, you guys have been really, really super patient. This is really technical, considering that I should have had charts and stuff to put up so that you could see this a little more clearly, and we'll get those developed. And I am working aggressively on writing commentary so that you don't have to make zillions of notes. You can kind of go from verse to verse in the Bible itself. But I had never really put together the Old Testament picture, and because I was as confused as the Jews were. I would think about the Old Testament, I go, why doesn't the Old Testament say anything about how this tribulation fits into the Messiah? Why doesn't the Old Testament say anything about what happens to these living people? And all these questions. So anyway,